You watched people arrive after you and somehow move ahead of you. You stood beside them when they were uncertain, celebrated their victories when no one else noticed, and quietly believed that your own time would come next. But it never seemed to happen. Another opportunity passed, another relationship faded, another door closed without explanation. You smiled because you did not want anyone to see the weight you carried, but inside, you wondered why your life always felt one step behind everyone else's. There were nights when you lay awake replaying every decision you had made, searching for the mistake that must have caused you to be left behind. You questioned your worth without saying the words out loud. You prayed prayers that became shorter with time because repeating the same request over and over began to feel exhausting. You still believed in God, but sometimes you wondered if heaven had gone silent. You never stopped believing completely. You simply stopped expecting anything to change. And perhaps that is the deepest loneliness of all, not when people forget you, but when hope begins to whisper instead of sing. Maybe you have walked into family gatherings where everyone seems to have found their place except you. Maybe you have opened social media only to watch another engagement announcement, another promotion, another dream becoming reality for someone else, while your own life feels suspended in an invisible waiting room. Maybe you have looked around and thought everyone received the instruction manual except you. You ask yourself questions you would never dare ask anyone else. Why does it seem so easy for them? Why do I always feel like I arrive too late? Why does every season of my life seem longer than everyone else's? Why do I keep feeling as though I am always the one left standing after everyone has gone home? Those thoughts are heavier than most people realize because they are carried in silence. They are not dramatic enough for people to notice, yet they slowly shape the way you see yourself. Little by little, disappointment begins to disguise itself as identity. You no longer think you are simply waiting. You begin believing you are someone who is always left behind. But what if that conclusion is not the truth? What if the story you have been telling yourself is only one chapter instead of the ending? What if the silence you are living through has been preparing something inside you that could never have developed in constant applause? Before we go any further, if these words feel like they have been describing your own hidden thoughts, leave a comment saying I understand. Sometimes seeing that someone else has walked through the same valley reminds us that we were never truly alone. There is something remarkable about the way God often works throughout Scripture. Again and again, the people He shaped most deeply spent long seasons watching others move ahead while they remained hidden, not because they were forgotten, but because they were being formed. The difficult part is that formation rarely feels meaningful while it is happening. It feels like delay. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. Imagine waking up every morning expecting life to change, only to discover another ordinary day waiting for you. Imagine carrying dreams that no one else understands because they cannot see what God has placed inside your heart. Imagine trying to explain to someone why you still have hope when every visible circumstance seems to argue against it. Eventually, many people stop sharing their dreams altogether, not because the dreams disappeared, but because protecting them became easier than defending them. Perhaps that has happened to you. Perhaps there are prayers you no longer mention because you have grown tired of hearing people say, "Be patient." Patience is easy to recommend when someone else is doing the waiting. But there is another side to waiting that few people ever discuss. Waiting exposes what hurried living can hide. It reveals where our confidence truly rests. It uncovers fears we did not know we carried. It brings hidden wounds into the light. When every distraction is removed, we finally hear the conversations taking place inside our own hearts. Sometimes those conversations are filled with faith. Sometimes they are filled with fear. Sometimes they alternate between both within the same hour. You may wake up believing God has a purpose for your life and go to bed wondering if you imagined the whole thing. That emotional tension does not mean your faith is broken. It means your faith is being exercised. Strength is never developed without resistance. Character is never deepened without testing. Trust is never proven until certainty disappears. Think about the moments when you felt invisible. The invitation never came. Your kindness was overlooked. Someone else received recognition for work you quietly contributed to. You loved people who slowly drifted away. You remained loyal while others moved on without looking back. Those experiences leave scars that no one else can see. Yet those unseen scars often become the places where compassion quietly grows. The people who have never experienced abandonment sometimes struggle to recognize lonely hearts. But those who have sat alone in dark seasons often become the ones who notice the person standing by themselves after everyone else has left. Pain has a strange way of enlarging the heart when we refuse to let it harden us. That does not make the pain enjoyable. It simply means God is able to bring purpose even from experiences we would never have chosen. There are moments when it seems everyone else received immediate answers while your prayers continue echoing into silence. During those moments, the temptation is to measure your life against someone else's timeline. Comparison quietly steals peace because it convinces you that another person's season should determine how you evaluate your own. Yet every garden grows differently. Some seeds appear almost immediately. Others remain hidden beneath the surface far longer before anyone sees evidence of life. The absence of visible growth does not mean nothing is happening underneath. Roots often grow before fruit appears. Foundations are strengthened before buildings rise. Character develops long before influence becomes visible. It is difficult to celebrate invisible progress because no one applauds what they cannot see. Yet heaven is not limited to what human eyes recognize. God sees the prayers whispered through tears that nobody else noticed. He sees the moments you chose forgiveness when bitterness seemed easier. He sees every quiet act of faithfulness that never received recognition. The world often celebrates arrival, but God is deeply concerned with who we are becoming on the journey. Perhaps you have wondered why certain people walked out of your life just when you needed them most. Their absence may have left an ache that still resurfaces unexpectedly. You replay conversations, searching for the exact moment everything changed. You ask yourself whether you should have said something differently, loved differently, tried harder. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones without explanations. Yet not every departure is evidence that you failed. Sometimes seasons change because people are only meant to accompany us through part of the journey. Letting go hurts because our hearts naturally long for permanence in a world filled with temporary seasons. Even so, God's faithfulness is not measured by who stays beside us. His presence remains even when every familiar voice grows quiet. That does not erase loneliness overnight, but it transforms loneliness from proof of abandonment into an invitation to deeper dependence. There is a quiet courage that develops inside those who continue trusting without immediate results. It is not loud. It does not seek attention. It simply refuses to surrender hope, even after repeated disappointment. That kind of faith rarely makes headlines, yet it shapes lives in extraordinary ways. Perhaps the reason your journey feels slower is not because you are forgotten, but because God is building something within you that must be able to carry what lies ahead. If blessings arrive before character is prepared, they often become burdens instead of gifts. If influence comes before humility, success can quietly destroy what suffering once strengthened. God is never in a hurry to skip the work that protects His children from becoming crushed by what they once prayed to receive. That truth may not remove every question today, but it offers something equally valuable. It offers perspective, and perspective can become the beginning of renewed hope. Maybe you have spent so long believing you were left behind that you forgot another possibility altogether. Maybe you were being lovingly held back from running ahead before your heart was ready. Maybe what looked like delay was actually protection. Maybe what felt like rejection became redirection. Maybe what seemed like silence was the place where God was patiently shaping the person you are becoming, one unseen moment at a time. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this story has not even begun to unfold. There is a moment that almost everyone who has walked with God eventually encounters, yet very few people ever talk about it honestly. It is the moment when you realize that you can no longer measure God's faithfulness by what is happening around you. At first, that realization feels frightening because visible progress has always been easier to understand than invisible transformation. We naturally look for signs that things are getting better. We want relationships to heal, opportunities to appear, prayers to receive clear answers, and burdens to become lighter. But then there comes a season when none of those things seem to happen. You continue praying, but heaven feels quiet. You continue trying, but the results remain hidden. You continue believing, but your emotions no longer cooperate with your faith. It is in that difficult place that many people quietly conclude they have somehow disappointed God. They begin wondering if perhaps He has chosen someone else, someone stronger, wiser, or more deserving. Those thoughts rarely arrive all at once. They enter gently, almost unnoticed. They whisper that if God truly cared, your life would look different by now. They suggest that perhaps your waiting is punishment instead of preparation. They convince you that everyone else is moving toward purpose while you remain standing at the edge of your own life, watching it happen for other people. Yet those whispers ignore something profoundly important. They only measure what can be seen. They never account for what God is accomplishing beneath the surface. Think about the seasons in your life when you were forced to slow down. At the time, you probably viewed them as interruptions. Looking back now, you may realize they became the very places where your heart changed the most. Perhaps you learned compassion because someone broke yours. Perhaps you discovered patience because nothing happened according to your schedule. Perhaps you became more gentle because life humbled you in ways success never could. These transformations rarely happen during moments of comfort. They are born in seasons we would never volunteer to experience. This is one reason the chosen often feel left behind. God is not only concerned with where they are going, He is deeply invested in who they will become once they arrive. Imagine receiving everything you prayed for while still carrying the same fears that once controlled your decisions. Imagine stepping into influence while insecurity continues directing your identity. Imagine entering healthy relationships without healing the wounds that taught you to expect abandonment. The blessing itself would not solve those deeper struggles. In many cases, it would simply expose them more clearly. That is why God's work often begins inside long before it becomes visible outside. You may have noticed something unusual about your own life. Every time you think you have finally reached a place of stability, another unexpected challenge appears. At first, this can feel discouraging. You wonder why peace seems temporary while struggle feels familiar. But what if these moments are not evidence that you are moving away from God? What if they are opportunities to deepen your dependence on Him? There is a difference between knowing about trust and actually trusting. Anyone can speak confidently when life is predictable. Genuine trust grows when certainty disappears. The chosen often discover that faith is less about understanding every step and more about continuing to walk even when the next step remains hidden. This kind of journey can feel incredibly lonely because not everyone will understand it. Some people around you may unintentionally make your burden heavier. They ask questions that seem harmless, but quietly reopen wounds you have been carrying for years. Why are you still single? Why has your career not taken off yet? Why has this prayer not been answered? Why are you still waiting? They do not realize that you have already asked yourself those same questions hundreds of times in the middle of the night. They cannot hear the conversations you have had with God while trying to hold back tears. They cannot see the moments when you almost gave up, but somehow found the strength to keep believing one more day. They only see the chapter you are living. God sees the entire story. There is something deeply painful about feeling misunderstood, while also trying to remain hopeful. Sometimes you stop explaining yourself because you know people will not fully understand anyway. Instead, you quietly carry your questions into prayer. You tell God things you have never spoken aloud to another human being. You admit that you are tired. You confess that your heart feels discouraged. You acknowledge that you do not understand why this season has lasted so long. Those prayers may seem weak to you, but they are often the most honest expressions of faith. Real faith is not pretending everything is fine. Real faith is bringing your broken heart to God instead of hiding it from Him. Throughout Scripture, we repeatedly see people who poured out confusion, grief, disappointment, and longing before God. Their honesty did not push Him away. It drew them closer. God is not threatened by sincere questions that arise from a heart seeking Him. He already knows every fear you carry. He knows the tears you never allowed anyone else to witness. He knows the dreams you quietly placed on the shelf because hoping became too painful. He knows the moments when you smiled in public while privately wondering whether your life would ever change. Nothing about your present season surprises Him. Nothing about your waiting has escaped his attention. Sometimes we assume that because God is silent, he is absent. Yet silence and absence are not the same thing. A loving parent watching a child learn to walk does not intervene with every wobble. Their presence remains constant, even when they are not speaking. In a similar way, God's silence often invites deeper trust rather than signaling abandonment. You may not always understand his timing, but his character remains unchanged. He is still faithful when answers are delayed. He is still good when circumstances remain difficult. He is still present when emotions insist otherwise. Perhaps one of the hardest lessons in the life of the chosen is learning that your value cannot be determined by how quickly life unfolds. Our culture celebrates speed, faster success, faster recognition, faster results. Yet the kingdom of God consistently points toward depth rather than speed. A tree that grows too quickly without strong roots becomes vulnerable when storms arrive. A heart that matures through long seasons of waiting develops stability that cannot easily be shaken. This is why some of the strongest believers are not those who have experienced the least suffering, but those who continued walking with God through years of unanswered questions. Their confidence no longer depends on immediate outcomes. It rests in the one who has remained faithful through every season. If this message is reminding you of your own journey, share your story in the comments. Someone else may read your words and realize they are not the only one carrying these hidden burdens. Your testimony of perseverance could become the encouragement another weary heart desperately needs today. One day you may discover that the very season you wanted to escape became the season that taught you how to recognize God's presence beyond circumstances. You may realize that being left behind by people often created room to walk more closely with him. You may even look back and thank God for prayers that were delayed because those delays protected you from becoming someone you were never meant to be. That does not mean every painful experience was good in itself. Loss still hurts, rejection still wounds, loneliness still aches. But God has a remarkable ability to redeem experiences that seem meaningless while we are living through them. Redemption does not erase the scars. It gives them purpose. It transforms reminders of pain into reminders of grace. Perhaps that transformation has already begun inside you without your realizing it. Perhaps your compassion has deepened. Perhaps your patience has grown stronger. Perhaps your dependence on God has become more genuine than it was when life felt easier. Those changes matter more than you know. They are evidence that while you believed nothing was happening, heaven was quietly shaping your heart. The world may look at your life and see delay. God may look at the same season and see preparation. The world may see someone left behind. God may see someone being firmly established before the next chapter begins. And while you still cannot see the full picture, you can hold on to this quiet assurance. Your story is not defined by the moments when others moved ahead of you. It is being shaped by the faithful God who has never stopped walking beside you, even through the longest seasons of waiting. One day you may look back on this season and realize that the greatest miracle was not that your circumstances finally changed, but that somewhere along the way, your heart did. That realization rarely comes suddenly. It grows quietly, almost unnoticed, like dawn replacing the darkness one gentle ray of light at a time. You begin to recognize that you no longer panic every time another door closes, because you have learned that a closed door is not always a closed future. You no longer feel the same crushing need to compare your journey with someone else's because you have discovered that purpose cannot be measured by another person's timeline. You still experience disappointment. You still feel the sting of rejection. You still have moments when loneliness settles over your heart like a heavy cloud. But those experiences no longer define your identity. They have become places where you have repeatedly encountered the faithfulness of God. That is one of the quiet transformations of a chosen life. At the beginning of the journey, you ask God to change your circumstances. As the years pass, you slowly discover that He has also been changing you. The person who once believed being left behind meant being forgotten begins to understand that God has never confused hiddenness with abandonment. There are seasons when roots grow deeper than branches rise higher. No one celebrates roots because they cannot be seen. No one applauds what is happening beneath the ground. Yet every tree that survives fierce storms owes its strength to the invisible work that happened long before anyone admired its beauty. Perhaps that is where you are today. You may feel unseen by people, overlooked in your workplace, misunderstood within your family, or forgotten by those you once believed would always stand beside you. The temptation is to think that because people do not recognize your value must somehow be less. But your worth has never been determined by human recognition. Long before anyone applauded you or ignored you, you were already known by God. Long before anyone appreciated your kindness or overlooked your sacrifices, He saw every quiet act of faithfulness. Long before anyone believed in your potential, He understood every possibility He had placed within you. Human approval rises and falls like the tide. God's love remains steady. That truth becomes an anchor when everything else feels uncertain. There may still be mornings when you wake up carrying questions that have not yet been answered. There may still be evenings when tears come without warning because another reminder of what you hoped for has appeared before your eyes. Healing is rarely a straight path. Faith is rarely free from struggle. There are days when your confidence feels strong, and other days when simply continuing to pray feels like an act of courage. Do not mistake those difficult days for failure. Even the strongest believers experience moments of weariness. The difference is not that they never become tired. The difference is that they continue bringing their tired hearts back to God again and again. He is patient with weakness. He is compassionate toward those who are weary. He does not ask you to pretend that your pain does not exist. He invites you to bring it into His presence, trusting that He can carry what has become too heavy for you to bear alone. Think about how many times you survived seasons you once believed would completely break you. There were days when you could not imagine making it through another week. Yet somehow God gave you enough strength for one more day, then another, then another. Looking back, you may not remember every detail, but you remember this: He did not abandon you. His help did not always arrive in the way you expected. Sometimes it came through unexpected peace, sometimes through a kind word from a stranger, sometimes through a passage of scripture that seemed written specifically for your situation, sometimes through the simple ability to get out of bed when you thought you could not. His faithfulness often appeared quietly rather than dramatically, yet it was no less real. Perhaps that is how He has been carrying you all along, not by removing every burden immediately, but by giving you enough grace for each step until you reach this moment. There is something beautiful that begins to happen when your confidence shifts from circumstances to God's character. You stop interpreting every delay as rejection. You stop believing every disappointment is permanent. You stop assuming that every unanswered prayer means heaven has forgotten your name. Instead, you begin asking different questions. Rather than wondering why everyone else seems ahead of you, you begin asking what God might be teaching you today. Rather than asking why your path looks different, you begin asking how you can remain faithful within the path you have been given. Those questions do not eliminate suffering, but they transform the way you walk through it. They replace despair with expectation. They replace bitterness with quiet trust. They remind you that while you cannot control every circumstance, you can choose where your hope rests. Perhaps the greatest danger of feeling left behind is not the delay itself. It is allowing delay to convince you that your story no longer matters. That is a lie you must refuse to believe. Every chapter of your life has value, including the ones you would never choose to relive. The tears you cried in private shaped compassion that success alone could never produce. The disappointments you endured developed perseverance that comfort could never teach. The loneliness you experienced created space where you learned to hear God's voice more clearly than the noise of the crowd. None of those lessons came easily, but they were not wasted. Nothing surrendered into God's hands is ever meaningless. Even the broken pieces of your life can become part of a testimony that points someone else toward hope. Imagine another person who is sitting exactly where you once sat, convinced they have been forgotten. Imagine them wondering whether God still sees them. Imagine them believing they have fallen too far behind to ever catch up. One day, your story of endurance may become the very encouragement they need. Not because your life became perfect, but because you discovered that God's presence was enough to carry you through imperfection. That is how hope multiplies. It moves from one healed heart into another still waiting for healing. It reminds people that they are not walking alone. If this message has been speaking to your own journey, let your testimony encourage someone else. Share in the comments one way God has carried you through a difficult season, or simply write "I am still trusting" if you are still in the middle of your waiting. Your words may become the reminder another person needs today that God has not forgotten them either. As this chapter comes to a close, hold on to one truth above all the others. Being left behind by people does not mean being left behind by God. Human timelines are limited. Human understanding is incomplete. Human recognition is inconsistent. But God's love is constant. His wisdom reaches beyond what you can currently see. His purposes are never rushed, never careless, and never disconnected from His goodness. You may not know exactly what tomorrow holds. You may still carry questions that remain unanswered. You may still find yourself in a season that feels longer than you ever imagined. Yet even here, your life is not standing still. Every act of faith, every quiet prayer, every decision to keep trusting, every moment you choose hope instead of despair, is shaping you into someone more deeply rooted in God's grace. And perhaps that has been the hidden miracle all along. While you were afraid you were falling behind, God was faithfully leading you forward in ways your eyes could not yet perceive. One day, when you see the full picture, you may discover that the path you once wished away became the very road that brought you closer to Him than you ever thought possible. Until that day arrives, keep walking, keep praying, keep believing. Not because every answer has already appeared, but because the God who has carried you this far has never stopped being faithful. Your waiting is not your identity. Your loneliness is not your destiny. Your delays are not the measure of your worth. You are seen. You are loved. You are being shaped. And even if the world believes you have been left behind, the hands of God have never let you go for a single moment.